Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. So I think as of now, you would know now, I am Dr. Rashi, and I'm going to moderate this session for you. So today is going to be the last webinar of our three-part series. So it's only appropriate that I keep reiterating why we are doing this webinar. So this webinar is a part of an online boot camp that is being organized for Bharat Innovates. Bharat Innovates is a special opportunity for Indian startups and faculty entrepreneurs to showcase their innovations on a global stage. This program is being supported by Ministry of Education, PSA, and they've identified 13 themes. One of the theme is biotechnology, which is being led by DBT-BIRAC, and that's the organization I am representing. So, as you would know now, the phase one shortlist of the program is out, and the selected participants will soon showcase their innovations and they'll be pitching and exhibiting at IIT Gandhinagar very soon. So, the entire series was designed and curated to help you in your journeys. So far, in the first webinar, we had people from DBT BIRAC speaking who gave you an overview of the different enabling platforms. The second webinar was focused on investments and fundraising. Today, we have Mr. Akash Dhade, and he'll be talking about how one can navigate through regulatory approvals in India, US, as well as Europe. So, thanks, Akash, for agreeing to do this with us. He's the associate manager from Venture Center, and Venture Center is one of the largest technology centers from Maharashtra, Pune. It is also a long-standing collaborator of DBT Bharat. So delighted to have you with us, Akash. So just before I hand over the session to Akash, a gentle reminder to all the attendees, please keep typing your questions in the chat box. We'll take them up in the Q&A session, which would follow after Akash's talk. Over to you, Akash.
Thank you, Dr. Rafi. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this session. I am very glad to present my findings and also my guidance documents for regulatory aspects for medical devices in Indian, European, as well as US markets. Very warm welcome to all. And I'll just share my screen and we'll get started with our session.
Yes.
I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So today we'll go through the pathways for medical devices market in India, US, and Europe. While doing so, if you have any queries, I request all the participants to post your queries in the chat box. Dr. Rashi will collect them, and at the end of the session, we'll take those queries. Before moving ahead, I'll just briefly introduce RFC, Regulatory Information and Facilitation Center. We have incorporated in July 2018. We are part of Venture Center Facilities and Infrastructure. So we came into existence as a joint initiative of Venture Center and BIRAC under BIRAC Regional Bioinnovation Center, that is BRBC. So our aim is to help medical device startups, innovators to plan their regulatory pathway, guide them through these regulatory strategies, enable them through the competency with respect to ISO certifications, various regulatory approvals and licenses, as well as we also assess them, assess the documentation for those startups for completeness and compliance against these regulatory standards. So earlier we were in the domain of medical devices, IVDs, like diagnostics and software as medical devices only. But recently we have also launched our services in food and nutrition parts, wherein if any startup is working towards health supplements or nutraceuticals or food for dietary or medical purposes or functional and novel foods. So right now we are also helping these startups getting the regulatory approvals and also helping them through the regulatory journey. What I've seen is in earlier sessions or earlier webinars, people also touch base upon the investment part. So if somebody wants to raise the investment to their stakeholders, and if they fall under these categories like medical devices and health supplements, then regulatory strategy becomes a very important factor. How to raise the funds, right? In how to raise the funds, because the stakeholders want to understand if you have knowledge, if you have any idea about regulatory strategy. So we come in picture in that aspect, providing you with the guidances and also the reports that can be shared to these investors. So investors also build confidence on this regulatory strategy, and this regulatory strategy will help you getting these funds as well. As I mentioned, we have different offerings starting from advisory, then a regulatory pathways, getting ISO certification, completing clinical trials and all. So I have just enlisted these offerings for us. And as I mentioned, we are into Indian market, European and US FDA markets right now. These are just the matrices for our services. We have served more than 90 startups till now. We have got 10 plus approvals and licenses as such. But this number, 90 plus, all those got benefited out of our offerings to get sometimes the funding, sometimes getting ahead with their ISO certifications, and so on. With that, I'll move to our current topic, and I'll just start with the questions because these questions help us understand the market size as well as who all are the competitors and how big this market is. So, first question, what is the world's largest medical device market? So, as you might have known that US FDA is the largest medical device market, and the market size, as the second question is, guess the size of largest medical device market. The current medical device market of US is about $300 billion. So even if you want to enter in Indian market, your ultimate goal can be entering US FDA, US market, so that you get a good revenue as well as a large market size, wherein you can sell your diversified portfolio. Then the third question would be leading medical device companies. So there are many medical device companies in market, but right now Johnson and Johnson, Medtronic, then Philips Healthcare. These are some of the major medical device companies who operate in India and across globe. Similarly, what we are also trying to do is help Indian startups gaining access to these global markets. So, Make in India. These are some of the kind of projects we are trying to help, wherein we help Indian medical device market startups to get their devices in other markets. And which are the key factors driving these markets? Right now, it's the age of AI and ML, and we also have a lot of information access. So, which are the key factors driving these markets? As I mentioned, this AI ML is one of the factors, as well as access to information. For example, if we have different options of medical devices, we try to get the information on those medical devices and try to take help of those medical devices in our daily day-to-day activities. I can give you one example. For example, in five years back, there was no prevalent of glucose monitoring devices. However, right now, if you see, for example, my personal experience, my mother has diabetes. So 5 years back, there was no glucose monitoring devices available in market. But right now, if you see, we have portable medical devices which can monitor the glucose. So portability is one of the aspect, the accessibility is one of the other aspect by which these medical devices markets are growing in India. So this is a very good time if you have any medical devices. You can definitely take help of the technology to grow your market in India and across globe. This is the scenario in India. As of 2024, Indian market was $12 billion, and it is expected to be increased to $50 billion by 2030, thanks to schemes such as Make in India, then public profit linked incentives and Ayushman Bharat schemes that helps the medical devices startups in India to innovate, to get their products in India and sell them. So Make in India scheme, as we know, it is helping medical devices startups by different incentives as well as offerings to build and innovate their innovations in incubation centers or healthcare settings, right? To solve some of the problems Indian population is facing. Similar to that, there is Ayushman Bharat. So Ayushman Bharat is a scheme wherein government is focused on public health. They want to uh, they want to provide these public healthcare facilities to public at a large scale. That is why government of India is also procuring some of these medical devices in bulk. So, which is a very good thing for a startup or medical device innovator to start thinking upon. If you come across a certain problem statements from government of India, please try to work upon them because government of India procure these medical devices in bulk as these problem statements are catering to some of the target population which are very specific to Indian population. Now, coming to regulatory aspects of medical devices in India, there is an agency called Central Drugs Standard Control Organization. This agency governs medical devices as well as pharma products in India. Now, this government agency works in two layers. One layer being Central Licensing Authority, and second layer being State Licensing Authority. So each of the Indian states like Maharashtra or Gujarat or Madhya Pradesh, they have their own state licensing facilities wherein a medical devices startup, if they fall under Class A or Class B, they can go and get their test licenses or manufacturing license. Now, as you can see here, the classification of Indian medical devices is based on Indian Medical Device Rules 2017. So this rule came into existence in 2017. It replaced Drugs and Drugs Act, which was published in 1942. So currently, Indian Medical Device Regulation classifies medical devices based on its risk, wherein Class A is the least risky devices and Class D is highest risk devices. Now, as I mentioned, Central Licensing Authority and State Licensing Authorities have their different roles. Central Licensing Authority takes care of Class C and D. State Licensing Authority takes care of Class A and B devices. There are two licenses. One license being test license, wherein this test license is required to generate the verification and validation data. Along with that, you also have to have ISO 13485. ISO 13485 is nothing but quality management system. It is a basic requirement for any medical device startup. So you should implement ISO 13485 within your organization, get certified with respect to ISO 13485, and along with the certification and verification and validation data, you go ahead for manufacturing license. So in Indian market, unless and until you have this manufacturing license, you will not be able to sell the device. So the prerequisites, you get test license, you obtain ISO 13485, and then you go ahead with manufacturing license. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier also, your stakeholders or funding agencies, they require this regulatory pathway laid out clearly since the start so that they also have confidence that people who are building this innovation, these medical devices have understanding about regulatory compliances also. Because in innovations, in startup culture, for medical devices specifically, it is not adequate to focus only on market or your design. Regulatory aspects are very crucial part, and unless and until you cross that barrier, you will not be able to sell your device in Indian market or any other market for that matter. So there is implementation mechanism of ISO 13485 also. So if somebody wants to get ISO 13485 certification, they should draft standard operating procedure for their design, for the risk management, for their regulatory strategy. So basically what it means is whatever activities you are going to do to produce your medical device, those activities should be in line with certain standards, certain standard operating procedure, so that the quality of the medical device which you are going to produce is consistent across all the timelines. And the reason being why this quality is very important, because these medical devices are going to deal with patients' health, patient's life. So if your device is not of consistent quality, there is no assurance on the safety of your device. That is why it is very important to take care of this quality management system, ISO 13485 and other ISO related factors to implement them in your daily activities. Okay, so if you want to get in Indian market, if you want to get ISO certifications, what are the key considerations? So from starting of design itself, you should have well prepared documentation. You'll ask why this documentation is important. The importance of this documentation can be highlighted in this regulatory submission process, because when CDSU asks for documentation, if you have structured documentation, they take less time, they ask less questions, and you get these approvals quickly, because there is a standard timeline given for each of these activities that are mentioned. For example, test license has a timeline of 30 days. So if you submit application for test license in government portal, then they will take 30 days to answer back to your application, whether your license is approved or your license is revoked or not approved. So if you have proper data, proper documents in place wherein this data is laid out appropriately and efficiently, then they provide you test license within 30 days or 20 days. But if you don't have that documentation in proper format, then they may ask queries. Where is this information? Where is that information? And some of the information can be missing because you don't have format. So that is why during your developmental stage itself, whatever activities you are going to do, whether that is testing, whether that is designing your feature, your CAD drawings, right? Document these things at each stage. You can be going through different iterations. So these iterations also, if you have standard formats such as document for the user requirements, right? You must have obtained these user requirements from feedbacks, surveys, or any other mechanism. So please keep those documents in a separate folder, like user requirement documents. Create a folder on Google Drive, create a folder on your local drive, name them with user requirement documents, then design input documents, drawing documents, and so on and so forth. So what it does is it provides an idea. How are we going ahead with our design process? And at the end, when you want to submit this documentation to your regulatory authorities, it becomes easier to get out the data, put it in a proper documented format, and submit it to regulatory authorities. That helps you track your progress as well as it reduces your timeline when you deal with regulatory authorities such as CDSCO or EU or US FDA for that matter. Okay. Second thing is with respect to engagement with CDSCO. Sometimes the startups or manufacturers assume that CDSCO comes at the end of your design process, only when you want to get the approval. But that is not true. If you want to engage with CDSU, there are portals such as National Single Window System Portal, NSWS. So they have meetings every day from 3 to 4. So this is one of the aspects. If you want to meet state FDA authorities, if you want to meet central licensing authorities, you can go ahead, find out their location in your vicinity. You can go ahead, get their appointment and ask your questions with respect to your medical devices. For example, you can ask about the intended use. You can ask about this classification of your medical devices, and also you can check if your regulatory pathway is already laid out. You can get confirmation from them if you are going correctly or not. So CDSO is very helpful in that aspect. If you want to get their help, please go and visit the nearest FDA authorities, FDA facilities, and they will be happy to answer your questions. But again, they have limited time and there are so many manufacturers, so many startups. So they may respond to you a little late, but when they get to your questions, they'll definitely answer your questions. And the third aspect would be assistance of the expert. Similar to the RFC activities that I've shown, if you have someone who can help you in regulatory strategy, get their help, get the nitty-gritties cleared out, and ask them where the regulation come in picture, where the quality aspect in come in picture throughout the development. They'll be able to tell you what all aspects to be taken care. For example, when you take user requirement, you may ask questions to user that what medical condition you are trying to solve, right? How what kind of device you want, whether the portable device, what all features you need in the medical device, how the user interface should be, what are the clinicians' inputs or requirement with respect to your medical devices. And by that time, some of the requirements are accumulated, but major requirement with respect to regulations, the standards are overlooked. So if you have regulatory expert in your team, ask them what a regulatory requirement I should consider so that those can be incorporated in my design. That may be from the documentation perspective, some design feature perspective. So that's how you accumulate all the requirements from design, clinicians, users, as well as regulatory to make your device complete and comply with these regulations. Okay. Next is, as I mentioned, there are four classification of medical devices from class A to class D, and these are just some of the examples. For example, class A devices are bronchial cannula, ice bag, or iPad. And similarly, class B devices are performed dental crown, which are permanent in nature. Those can be there permanently in human body. Now, this classification again is based on different factors. For example, intended use. If your device is working towards medical condition for a patient who patient's heart system or brain system or nervous system, then the risk gets increased. That is why those devices are categorized under class C or class D. Right. So, for example, here the brain electrical stimulation system. This device deals with human brain, which is very critical component of a human body for function. Right. So that is why it's classified as under class D. Similarly, class C devices such as pacemakers, heart stent, right, implants, because their patient context, as in they goes into patient's body, stay there. That is why the risk of these devices is very high, and that is why they are classified as class C or class D. Similar to that, there are prosthesis devices. Since the patient contact is more, there are risk of allergies, there are risk of reactions, infections. That is why the risk category is higher than the other medical devices. Then there are surgical staplers that can be class B devices, right? Because their patient contact is less. And medical conditions also are of less risky. That is why they can be considered as class B or class C. And as I mentioned, this is the regulatory process flow for getting into Indian medical device market. Um, for test lessons, you should have your prototype ready. Until and unless you have your design fixed, one test, and this is because one test license is valid for only one design. If you get test license for your finalized design and then you go ahead and make changes to your design, then you have to apply for new test license. And by design change, what I mean is you are changing the design feature or device feature or specification, or even if you are changing the material. For example, in this design iteration one, you are saying that my medical device enclosure will be plastic enclosure. But after testing the plastic enclosure, you come to conclusion that no, I want to make this enclosure of stainless steel or titanium. That also constitutes a design change. And if you have already gotten the test license for plastic enclosure, then if you are changing that design, then you also have to get a new test license for generating the data from scratch. So make sure that you freeze your design. You have all the specifications ready with respect to measurements, length, size, width or dimensions, as well as material specification. Okay. Then qualify the product as a device. Right now, there are a lot of devices which can be considered as medical devices if their claim changes a little bit. For example, I'll take Example of smartwatch. Right now, if you are wearing certain health monitoring smartwatches, they track your SpO2, they track your health heartbeat, and other physiological parameters like sleep. But certain conditions with respect to sleep, like insomnia, they are medically diagnosed. Okay. And if you are building certain product such as that smartwatch, but you are saying that my watch will track insomnia, then you classify your device as medical device. Until and unless you claim certain medical device, certain medical condition with your product, that product will not be considered as a medical device. So CDSCO has given a proper definition of a medical device. So even before going for medical device regulation, medical device regulatory strategy, you have to identify whether your device, whether your product falls under medical device category. Because if you are qualifying your product as medical device, then all of these regulatory aspects should be taken care. But if your product falls under the category of a borderline medical device or a product which can avoid the regulatory pathway altogether, then in that case, you should connect with regulatory experts, CDSU, because that will reduce your burden to a large extent. That is from time perspective, money perspective, as well as effort perspective. So even before going for regulatory strategies, you identify whether your product falls under medical device category or not. Then once you say that my product is a medical device, then you go ahead and categorize your device based on Indian medical device rule. So it can fall under class A, class B, class C, or class D. And this classification is very much important because based on this classification, the extent of documentation required will be decided. For example, for Class D devices, you need to go ahead for clinical trials, clinical investigation to generate the clinical data, which is not the case for Class A devices. Because Class A devices are very less risky devices, you just have to prove the performance of theirs on that devices with respect to certain standard. Okay, so classification is very important in that aspect. Also, CDSU will scrutinize your documentation in they will scrutinize it more if your device falls under class C and D because that will be dealing with the patient safety and health. Once you do that and obtain sufficient documentation, then you apply for test license. After you get the test license, you conduct the studies, right? There are testing, for example, biocompatibility testing for the devices which deals with patient contact. Then there are studies with respect to EMC, electromagnetic compatibility, electromagnetic interference, right? Then software as medical devices. So you have to prove that your device is safe and effective by conducting certain testing. And this testing is part of verification and validation activities. So, for example, for biocompatibility, there are standards called as ISO 10993. For EMC testing, there are standards called as IEC 60601. For softwares, there are standards such as IEC 62304. So what you need to do is you have to go through this standard, understand what this standard want, complete the testing as per this standard, and generate this data to submit to CDSU. Once you complete this verification and validation activities, you compile that data. So you compile VMA data, you compile device description data, you compile your labeling, right? Your product will be going into user's hand. So user must understand what this device is, how to operate that, right? Whenever you purchase any mobile, any headphones also, you get that user manual or a leaflet wherein all the functions of that particular device are mentioned, whether that is mobile, whether that is headphone, all the functionalities, the buttons, the user interface, all that is mentioned in that user manual. Similarly, there is a concept called as instruction for use. This instruction for use is a must document if your product is a medical device. That information for use document will contain all the information how to handle your device. that will contain the intended use of your device. Then what is the target population, the warnings of your medical device, then precautions, indications, contraindications, the symbols, the storage conditions, right? If there are any allergens. So that kind of data, that kind of documentation have to be compiled together with verification and validation data. Then you will complete this documentation and then you go ahead for quality management system implementation. And these activities can also go simultaneously or parallel. So you go ahead with verification and validation data. At the other end, you try to implement QMS by developing SOPs, standard operating procedure, then certain forms, templates, right? You write down that as a document, or you onboard some of the EQMS layers. Like there are, you might have heard of certain PLM tools such as Jira, Agile, right? These are the tools which help medical devices startups or any other manufacturer to track their documentation, their designs, right? And that's how you establish your quality management system. You compile all this data, technical documents, QMS documentation, and you then go ahead for manufacturing license. Manufacturing license may take 120 days or 150 days to get approved by CDSU. And once you get the manufacturing license, you can commercialize your product in Indian market. But there are certain aspects wherein if your device falls under class C or D, there are certain third party site audits for your manufacturing site. So once you apply for manufacturing license, there are government assigned agencies. They can come to your facility, as in manufacturing facility, to audit all these aspects. Whether you have quality management system certification in place, whether you have people in your team who can develop your device, right? Whether you have documentation ready in your premises, all those things, all these aspects will be taken care and audited by those third parties. They will submit that report to CDSU, and based on their assessment, your site will be approved or your manufacturing license will be approved. Okay, so this was the overview of CDSU or Indian market for medical devices. Now we will move to other global regulatory markets. For example, there are major global markets which are USA. US is the biggest medical device market, as I mentioned. Then there is European region. For US market, there are three routes called as 510K, pre-market approval, or de novo. These are major routes. However, there are other routes also. While going through these next sessions, I'll take you through these other routes also. For European Union, there is CE marking. The classification system for US is different. European classification system is different. Canadian, Australian, and Japanese also. So the basics is if you are going in different markets across globe, their requirements will be different in certain aspect. However, if you think combiningly, what they need is assurance that your device functions as intended and it does not pose any risk to the patient. So, from the design point of view, if you are starting your design, if you take a risk-based approach, for example, if you think what is the medical device condition or medical condition I'm trying to cater, and what are the risks associated with that medical condition, and what is the harm my device can pose to these patients, then you will be in a position to create documentation which are required by these regulatory authorities. For example, if you take risk-based approach, you will think that how can I make my medical device safer? And while thinking, you can come across design features. You can make design features so that your device is very safe for end user. And that documentation is required to be submitted to these regulatory authorities to prove the safety and effectiveness. Now we move to US FDA market. Now there is a concept called a subject device and predicate device in US market. And subject device is device which you are going to bring in US FDA or US market. And predicate devices are devices which are already marketed, legally marketed in those markets like US FDA. So keep these two terms in mind: subject device, which is your own device, and predicate device, the competitor's device. Okay, so all these devices are again classified based on risk, which are low risk devices, moderate risk devices, and high risk devices. So low risk devices are classified as class 1 device. Moderate risk devices are class 2, and third is class 3 devices. So based on again the categorization, there are different controls, and these controls are similar to requirements for medical devices. So class one and class one devices have general controls or general requirements such as labeling requirements and adverse events reporting a requirement. Then registration, listing. These are some of the requirements which normal class one devices have. Then there are special control requirements such as your device should be tested against certain standards recognized by US FDA. These performance standards can be standards such as IEC 62304, then IEC 60601, ISO 10993. So these controls are related to the risk classification. More the risk, more the controls. Okay, that's how it goes. And again, there is a concept of product codes. So you have to identify under which product code my medical device falls. Because these product codes will again direct you to certain FDA recognized standard against which you have to complete the verification and validation testing. So to summarize this slide, how it is, you identify the classification of your device, then you identify the product code. Based on that, you can also identify what all general requirements or special requirements are there, and also the standard against which you have to complete the testing. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, there are three classifications like class 1 devices, class 2, and class 3. Wherein for class 1 devices, some of these devices are exempted from the requirements, like they are excluded from the pre-market submission requirement. You don't have to submit the data as such to US FDA. But what you need to do is you have to register your establishment, like company ABC. So you have to register your company ABC in their database. There is a database called as MAUDE database, MAUDE, MAUDE database, wherein you go ahead, you provide the details of your entity, the administrative details, the address, your name, and that is sufficient to sell some of the medical devices. Okay, there is a list of exempted devices. They are also exempt from US FDA quality system regulation. They don't have to follow this. They just have to declare that my medical device is catering to this medical condition and it is manufactured as per certain standard. The only requirement is the registration and they do not require clinical data for approval. So this is the easiest way how you can get into US FDA. Then there are class 2 devices and they often require 510K. 510K is designation given for a regulatory pathway. Okay. When you someone say that I need 510K, it means that they have to submit documentation in certain format. And that documentation again is based on a comparison model. Okay. Comparison model is that you take your device, you compare the device with already marketed device. So this subject device is compared against predicate device. You compare that, you tell that my device is similar as that of predicate device or better. If your device is similar or it is better than the predicate device, then FDA accept your claim and you can sell that device in US FDA. But to do that, you need to obtain certain data. You need to prove through substantial equivalence. You need to prove that through your performance data and clinical data. So you create that documentation, you compare that through a tabular format, and you submit that documentation for approval request. And third is class 3 devices, which require a mandatory clinical investigation. So it needs a more extensive pre-market approval application, and it will also include the clinical data and rigorous testing. It is reserved for products exhibiting the highest risk to the patient. For example, I have shown in earlier slides the heart stents, the pacemakers, right? These are more risky devices, which needs to be proven for its safety. And for those devices, this pre-market route is required. Pre-market approval route is required. However, if you want to go ahead in US FDA market in your later stages, most of the times you are required to go with class 2 approval or 510K route because this route is the easiest one and most efficient one. Here also, you can take help of US FDA. There are free meetings with respect to US FDA. Those are called pre-submission meetings or Q-sub meetings. This can be scheduled well in advance, even if you don't want to go ahead with FDA. And say, for example, in next 3 months or 6 months, you can ask the FDA. We are planning to go ahead for US FDA approval. This is our strategy. This is our risk classification. Please confirm if it is correct or not. They will help you do that. They will also help you identify the correct testing methodology for verification and validation. So even if you don't want to go ahead for approval at this stage, we also recommend startups to go ahead for these pre-submission meetings or Q-sub meetings because they help you strategize and decide what should be your direction going ahead. Okay. As I mentioned, these are some of the submission routes, and I have highlighted pre-market notification because it's the most common pathway. Around 80% of regulatory approvals go through this 510K route. Then there are pre-market approval, which is for highest classification device. Then there is humanitarian device exemption. If we are I mean, this exemption is given for the devices which are catering to particular conditions. For example, in case of COVID-19, if your device would have worked towards COVID-19, you could have gone for this humanitarian device exemption form. Then there is 510K third party review program. This is something which is similar to 510K, but instead of FDA reviewer completing your review, there are certain agencies. They review your documentation and they recommend you to US FDA. Then there is de novo classification request. If you think that your device, your technology, it does not have any similar devices in market and it is very novel, there is novel solution given for certain medical conditions, then you go ahead and apply for de novo classification. This way, you can prove that my device does not fall under any category. There are no recognized standards, and the FDA can guide you through this process. And the advantages of going de novo classification is that your device will be first of kind in US FDA market, and that creates a huge opportunity. However, proving the novelty also becomes a burden for manufacturers sometimes, and that can create hurdles if you don't have sufficient funding or if you don't have sufficient timeline to get into market, right? And then there is investigational device exemption. To go ahead for PMA, you should conduct certain clinical investigation. And to conduct the clinical investigation, there is this route called as investigational device exemption. And by this, you can apply for this exemption, submit the clinical trial protocol, clinical trial design, and FDA will see to that clinical trial protocol and provide you the approval to conduct clinical trials, clinical investigations in US FDA authorities or in US healthcare settings, healthcare facilities. Okay. And I have focused here on 510K because it is the most common and most appropriate or relevant route wherein you submit the 510K. And as I mentioned, even before submission of 510K, you can also avail the facility of pre-submission meetings, Q submission meetings, just to understand what our documentation we have prepared, it is appropriate or not. Okay. So there are certain timelines. Once you submit the 510K, FDA receives that and they verify this documentation and provide you acknowledgement letter within 15 days of getting that application from manufacturer's end. Now to submit that also there are documentation such as cover letter. Then there is a format called as 510K format, 510K summary format. Then there are RTA, refuse to accept checklist. So all those documentation have to go in a particular format in a package so that they can be accepted by US FDA. If you don't provide any of this document, if there is certain data which is missing from your package, they provide you hold letter, and then they ask you what all documents are missing, what information is missing, and they give you certain timeline, say for example 10 days or 15 days to resolve that query. So once based on the issue that has taken based on the issue, if you respond accordingly and submit all the documents, then that timeline for approval resumes there. Then they route your application to appropriate authority. Like they have different divisions. Say, for example, for orthopedic, they have different division. For cardiovascular, they have different division. So based on your device's intended use, they route your application to that division and they assign a lead reviewer for your file. Now, this lead reviewer can take 180 days, 6 months to review a file based on the medical condition as well as intended use, and that is called as substantive review. And because they will go through all the documentation like clinical data, performance data, your IFU, labeling, risk management data, right? So they will review all the documents. They will see if this document is as per the requirement given by their guidance document or not, and they will provide you decision or certain communication. Sometimes they provide you certain information or they provide you deficiencies or additional information required request, that is called as interactive review or additional information request. In this interactive review they may ask to conduct certain more testing or they may ask if we have certain labeling changes to be done. They focus more on labeling because labeling is the ultimate document that can be that interacts with your patient. That is why all the things which are mentioned in label should be correct, appropriate. They should not be misleading, and they ensure that whatever claim you are making, your device works as intended through your documentation submission. In case they don't find any information, they provide you request. Once you provide sufficient data, sufficient information, they may ask you to change your design sometimes. And after completing all these activities, they provide you a decision letter, which is either your device is substantially equivalent or not substantially equivalent. Once you get the substantially equivalence claim for your device, it means that your application is cleared. Okay, so after that you can sell your device in US FDA market, and your regulatory pathway will not stop there. You should continuously monitor your device in that market so that you can keep on generating, collecting the data for post-market surveillance activities and keep on submitting that data to USFDA. But this is just an overview of regulatory submission pathway for 510K. Okay. So before that, I just wanted to check if there are any queries with respect to our participants. I can take one out.
Yes. So we have few questions. So just a second. Dr. Neetika is asking, could you please elaborate on the process of ISO 13485 as we are planning to outsource the manufacturing part?
Sure. So there are two cases for manufacturing license also. One case is manufacturing license on your own as a manufacturer, or there is a loan license facility or provision, wherein if you have a partner which has also gotten ISO 13485 already, you can opt out for that partner and get the license. That is also one of the way wherein you can get the loan license. But if you want to contract your manufacturing process, outsourcing it, and sell your device as a legal manufacturer, then you should have supplier quality agreement, which is required by ISO 13485. Okay. Then there are certain inspection records that you should mention. Then there should be some of the documentation wherein there is a provision that a legal manufacturer can also audit the supplier side or the contract manufacturer side. So all this provision has to be made in a documented format in a procedural way, and that's how you can comply to ISO 13485.
Okay. So I would probably extend that question. Does this certification comes with an expiry date?
It does come with the expiry date of 3 years, but it is
Hmm.
also on renewable basis. So if you complete that validity, you can ask that regulatory body or certification body to come to your facility to renew your certificate. So that is
Okay.
possible.
So once you have it, it's easier to extend it, right?
Yes,
Uh,
correct.
so Surita Sarkar is asking, in which class the pulse oximeter type of device falls in? It can measure multiple parameters.
So for that purpose, you have to go into specification. There are different categories. As you mentioned, there are multiple parameters. These parameters can fall under different categories. So basic rule is the highest categorization of yeah, medical device will be applied to you. For example, you
Okay.
are measuring pulse oxygen and it falls under class B. But you're also measuring certain other parameters which are falling under class C. Then automatically the classification of your device becomes class C, the highest is classification. So I need to
Okay.
go into specifics to identify what is the classification for that particular device. It cannot be
Okay.
done instantly. And
Okay, okay, I see. So I think people can always write to you if it's okay,
yes,
and he'll try to revert. So again, Dr. Neetika is asking, would FDA consider clinical data from India, or do we need to do studies in the US as well?
so I have seen they accept the data from India also. It's not mandatory to generate data in US FDA mostly. But in some cases, if your device is falling under class 3, then US FDA might ask you to generate some of the data in US FDA. And that
Oh,
is because there are differences between geography, the physical anatomy of a patient, right? Or also, and also the medical conditions. So to prove that difference in these parameters that I've just mentioned does not prove fatal or concern any safety risk, you have to conduct certain studies in US FDA or US FDA associated facilities.
okay.
But there is no mandatory provision as such.
Okay. So, I mean, I'll again ask a question from me here. So, when do you think one should apply for, say, a US FDA approval if one is already marketing in India? When are we ready to, start exporting out?
One of the major factors is of money, okay,
Hmm.
obviously, because the US LDA market is largest medical devices and
Hmm.
also it is very evolved.
Hmm.
So they are very strict on the requirements, listing requirement or registration requirement. So doing these activities itself takes a lot of toll on startups mostly.
Right.
But if you have sufficient funds, then at any point of time you can go ahead for US FDA. But even before going, as I mentioned, you can also check the pre-submission meetings provision. You can
Right.
connect with them and you can see how feasible is that at this point. Once you
Okay.
understand from US FDA, then you get a clear picture if you are going in right direction and how
Hmm.
much effort with respect to time, money we have to put in to go ahead. So that becomes a major factor.
Okay. So, Ayushi from Galanto Innovations, she's asking, what is the major difference between Indian regulatory and US regulatory approval?
The major difference is with respect to data requirement. So for CDSO, the data which is sufficient to get the manufacturing license may not be sufficient to get US FDA approval. Because as I
Okay.
mentioned, evolved, they have a very specific guidelines to generate certain data. They have recognized standards against which you have to complete verification and validation testing. So the major difference is with respect to performance data and clinical data. So if you're planning to go ahead in US FDA, please consult with someone who has understanding about US regulatory approval also, because that way, while going for manufacturing license in India, you can take care of some of the requirements from US FDA also. There is a regulation called as Quality Management System Regulation, which will be implementation in 2026. So if you take care of those requirements, even if you are not going right now, that will help you in a longer run.
Okay. So we have request coming in for your slides. People, if you're comfortable,
So
you may share your slides. and the recording. So the session is being recorded. It would be available. So please keep following DBT-BIRAC's LinkedIn handle. So once it gets there, you'll get to know about it. So Nidhi is asking, what about software as a device? Do we still need similar CDSCO approvals, or are there any different set of approvals?
There is a lot of confusion for software as medical devices because there are two categories: the softwares which are embedded in medical devices and software which solely acts as medical devices. But even in both of these cases, you have to get approval from CDSCO or regulatory authorities if those are catering to medical conditions, right? If they are helping, alleviating, monitoring certain diseases, then they have to go through these regulatory approvals, whether it is for USA, whether it is for European or Indian market. Those are regulated devices. Any medical devices, whether hardware and software, or software only, they have to follow this path.
Okay. So Dr. Jyotsnendu is asking, so if somebody has Indian CDSCO approval, can they sell their products in other countries? Any country which can, where they can do this?
You can't get direct access as such,
Hmm.
but there is a help of manufacturing license. So when you get manufacturing license, you are already a step ahead because you know how to conduct QMS, how to conduct carry out the documentation process. So any of the other markets also, whether that is Indonesia, Southeast Asia, right, Middle East countries, African countries, they have basic requirements that you should have quality management system in place and you should have testing data. So while getting manufacturing license in India, you get all these things in place. So even if there is no direct access, these activities help you accessing these markets, and the timeline, the cost involved will be reduced if you have manufacturing license.
Okay. Yeah. So that is it for the questions now. So
Sure.
again, you may start. Yeah.
Okay. Now we'll move ahead with the next and final session for today's talk, and it is with respect to the European market. European market, it deals differently for medical devices from this infrastructure wise because there is European Commission at the top. This European Commission have different agencies dealing with medical devices product as well as pharma product. Okay, like medicines, there is a agency called as European Medicine Agencies for dealing with medicines, and there is agency called as European Medical Devices Coordination Group. This deals with medical devices. Now I'll focus on MDCG only. MDCG is an authority which drafts guidelines. Similar to FDA guidelines, there are guidelines drafted by MDCG, and these guidelines are with respect to all the requirements for medical devices. That can be PMS requirement, risk management requirement. Then there are requirements for clinical evaluation, requirements for data for software as medical devices, classification of your medical devices, then UDI, unique device identifier, which is required to identify your device throughout the product life cycle. That is also given as a guidance by MDCG. Now, before 2017, there were two directives called as Medical Device Directive, MDD, and Active Implantable Medical Device Directive. They combined these two, and there comes European Medical Device Regulation, which is the current medical device or regulation you need to comply with if you want to enter in European market. And these regulation, once you follow this regulation and comply with that, these notified bodies, they give you CE marking. So if you see any device which is sold in European market, any product sold in European market, you can see CE marking. So CE, until and unless you have the CE marking pasted, physically pasted on your device, you'll not be able to sell any of these devices in European market. So these are the notified bodies who assesses your documentation and provide you CE marking. But notified bodies are also under the scrutiny of competent authorities. Okay, so you will ask what is the competent authority? These are national level authorities for each of these European countries. I think there are 27 European countries, and for each of these countries there are competent authorities. Competent authorities looks after notified bodies. They monitor them. scrutinize them, and they make sure that notified bodies also uh, function as intended, and they also monitor manufacturers proactively. If there are certain adverse events, certain recalls, then they proactively tell manufacturers. So these are very important because they take care of notified bodies as well as manufacturers. Then European Commission governs these competent authorities. So in a way, if you see, everybody is accountable and everybody is monitored by some other authorities, and they have to function as intended. Unless and until they do that, there won't be any repercussions. If they don't follow the rules, if they don't follow the regulation, their designation can be taken away by some of these authorities. Okay, so this is one link, and other link is with respect to manufacturers. So these competent authorities will be assessing the manufacturers, and manufacturer deals with suppliers, vendors, and consultants to get their medical device in European market. Suppliers and vendors, as we have taken one question, there can be contract manufacturing facilities, there can be facilities who sterilize your devices, there can be facilities who provide you raw material or design firms also. So manufacturers work in the tandem with the suppliers, vendors, and also they take help from regulatory consultant to get their devices in market. Then there can be other players also. For example, for the manufacturers who are outside India, they cannot enter in European market directly. Okay, they should have somebody who represent this outside Europe entity in Europe, and these entities are called as European Authorized Representative (ERP). EPR or yes, European Authorized Representative. So this European Authorized Representative acts as your extended arm in this European region and then take care of distribution activities, then market surveillance activities for the manufacturers who are outside European region. Now there are reference documents against which you have to generate the documentation and collect all the information. These documents are given here, and I'm providing this document so that everybody can understand the difference between different documents. Okay, this is a complete list. If you can see, this is a complete set. However, these documents that are listed, those are the subsets, and those are also having different intention. For example, European Medical Device Regulation (MDR), it is a text and it is a mandatory document to be followed. If you don't follow, there are legal repercussions, legal consequences if you don't comply with it. If you mention or say that I'm complying with medical device regulation, every other requirement have to be taken care, and you have to comply with that requirement all the time. Okay, until if you don't comply with that, then uh, you are in legal compliances issue, and you can attract hefty fines if you don't comply with MDR. Then MDCG guidelines. So if you think about this terminology, this is a regulation, right? And there is a guideline. Now there is a major difference between regulation and guideline. Regulation is legally binding document. You have to mandatorily comply with it. But guidelines are the documents which guides you in some of the aspect. And what are those aspects? Those aspects can be with respect to classification of your device, clinical investigation of your device, then UDAMED. UDAMED is a device database similar to MOD database in US FDA. UDAMED includes all the information about device, the manufacturer, its risk management data, clinical data, adverse events data. So if you want to get Kundali of any manufacturer in Europe, you visit this UDAMED database. Okay, then there are guidelines with respect to economic operators. These economic operators are distributors, European authorized agent, suppliers, right? They have enlisted the requirements and the duties of each of these economic operators in guidelines. Then there are guidelines for PMS, post-market surveillance, UDI, as I mentioned. There is third set of documents which are called as MEDEV or guidance documents or notified by body guidance documents or implementing acts. These guidance documents cater to different aspects of medical device. For example, this MEDEV guidance document It tells you how to conduct the clinical investigation, what all documents you should publish, you should collate and put in place in order to comply with EU MDR. Notified guide, body guidance document, they tell notified bodies how to conduct their activities. Who all are the people that should assess the manufacturer's documents and how to assess those documents. All those things can be are given in notified body guidance documents. Then there are implementing acts. For example, the timeline of this MDR, the fines of the MDR, all that are given in implementing acts. And finally, there is harmonized standards. So as I mentioned, there are performance standards for US FDA. There are harmonized standards for European region. And these are different than international standard. For example, ISO 13485, it is applicable for Indian context. But if you want to comply with EU MDR, then you should comply with E and ISO 13485. Okay, so there is a small difference of EN before ISO, but it makes a difference for getting C marking in Europe. Biotechs or by guidance, there is a little difference, very little difference in ISO 13485 and EN ISO 13485. However, the European notified bodies, they will ask you compliance for E and ISO 13485. So you have to take care if you are transitioning from CDSO to Europe, you should comply to E and ISO 13485. Okay, so these are some of the small differences, little differences or little different documentation requirement that you should take care if you want to transition from local body, local regulatory authorities or local market to global markets. Since I have mentioned the medical device definition for CDSCO, this definition is given in EU MDR. Okay, medical devices, and this is also similar to the definition given by CDSCO. As I mentioned, this is very important if you don't know if your product is medical device or not. So what you need to do is you have to go to the definition of medical device completely, check if your device, if your product falls under this definition, if it qualifies for this definition, and if it qualifies for this definition, then definitely you should go for regulatory pathway. And why that definition is helpful? Because it will again reduce your burden if your product does not qualify for this definition, right? It is a huge difference if you want to invest for regulatory strategies and if you want to go ahead only for product category. So make sure you visit medical device definition for specific markets and you see. And that is because medical device in India may not be a medical device in Europe or US FDA and vice versa. Medical device in US FDA may not be a medical device in India because of the differences in definition of medical device. So make sure again you visit the definition of medical device and understand if your product falls under the medical device category or not. Okay. Then what are the documentation requirement for CE marking? First, you should have medical device classification. Okay. And you should properly mention why your product qualifies as medical device. For example, my pulse oximeter measures blood glucose or oxygen in blood, and it is under the medical condition, say for XYZ. That is why my product is medical device. And also in second paragraph, you should mention as per rule number XYZ, my product qualifies for this rule, and that is why the classification of my product is class 1 or class 2A, class B, class 2B or class 3. Okay. So this is how you should put in your documentation, the verbiage or the text. Then clinical evidence documents. You should have clinical evaluation report. You can consider this as one of the major documents to compile the data for medical devices for CE marking. Clinical evaluation report has certain structure, it has certain section, and you should provide that data in that format. For example, in clinical evaluation report, there are two sections. One section is called as state of the art section. This state of the art section, it deals with the technology which is benchmark technology, the technology which are currently in market. And you should provide a summary and tell them that as per this current benchmark technology, my device also falls under these benchmarks, state of the art technology, and that is why it can be deployed in the market. Second section, which is called as literature search section, wherein you Google or you find out searches or literature which deals with your medical condition as in medical condition which your medical device is trying to cater to. You search with that medical condition, you search with the technology which is available in market in the databases such as mod database, midline database, pubmed database, and you try to identify adverse events, recalls, or the studies which strengthen the claim of your device, and you summarize that and provide that summary in clinical evaluation report. Okay, so my intention to mention all this is that these documentation requirements are very particular. There are certain guidances to collect this information. So if you want to understand these requirements and collect the information, please go through this documentation so that you have all the data ready. Because the timelines are more, the scrutiny is more, getting correct in first go is very important to avoid the delays as well as timely and monetarily burden, right? So that is why even before applying for this application, make sure that you have some expert, you have correct understanding of this regulation, these guidance documents, and you put together these documents in a proper format. Then there are requirements for unique device identification, UDI. As I mentioned, this can be a barcode which can be pasted on your device. It will give you information about the manufacturing date, manufacturing batches, then product information such as its description, right? The quantity and all those things. This is important in case your device fails in market. You need to trace back what was the batch, if that batch is manufactured correctly or not, and if that adverse events is related to raw material quality, then you have to identify uh, all the devices which went through that batch, and you have to recall all those batches. That is why this UDI requirement is very important. Then there is post-market surveillance. Now, some of the people, some of the manufacturers think that once they get this once they get this approval, they are done with it. Once they get the CE marking, they are done with it. But it's not the case. Once you get this approval, your responsibility even becomes more because you have to monitor your device continuously when that is in market. For example, if your device is in plant, a pacemaker or heart stent, you have to take a feedback and you have to connect with those patients continuously. Say, for example, at continuous interval, say for three months interval or 6 months interval, just to understand if your device is functioning properly or not, if there are any malfunctions, if there are any adverse events, and keep on collating that data. Your sales data will be there, your adverse events data will be there, right? And based on that data, you have to complete the trend analysis to showcase that there are no adverse events, no recalls, and in turn, there is no safety risk of my device when it is functioning in market. Okay, so there is a complete set of documentation for post-market surveillance. Then there are notified bodies. So these notified bodies, as I mentioned, you have to connect with them beforehand. You have to provide them idea of your device and tell them that we need to get CE marking. Please assess our documentation. So there are routes called as conformity assessment routes. Based on this risk classification, these conformity assessment routes will be applicable for your device, and these routes are again similar to the routes which I have mentioned. The scrutiny will be against the safety requirements and quality management system requirements. Here also for class 1 devices, some of these requirements are not that stringent. Class 1 devices can be self-certified and can be sold in market, but they should have quality management in place. But for class 3 devices, you should have clinical data, you should have manufacturing data, you should have quality management system data, And the notified bodies, the assessors, they will assess all the documentation and then only they will provide you C marking. And then there is a specific format of documentation similar to 510K summary. And in Europe, it is called as standard technical documentation. Okay, this technical documentation again has different sections. I'll just enlist few of them. Like device description is there, then accessories of your document section is there, then there is labeling and IFU, then there is general safety and performance requirement, then the risk management is there, clinical evaluation data is there, post-market surveillance data, V&D, verification and validation data. These are all the sections that you need to prepare as a summarized format. Okay, and that summary is taken based on the documentation which is there specific for risk management, clinical evaluation report, and VME data. So, for example, if you take risk management, you should have risk management plan, then failure mode and effect analysis document, preliminary hazard analysis document, risk management report, and in that risk management report also you should have benefit risk analysis, wherein you clearly say that based on our understanding, based on risk analysis and clinical evaluation, we see that the advantages, the benefit of our devices always outweigh the risk posed by my device. And that is why my device is safe for use. So all these aspects will be covered in risk management. All these documents will be derived in risk management process. However, while putting in technical documentation, you should summarize that. Okay, this is my benefit risk analysis. This is a risk management report. You can get more information in this risk management report. These are activities we have completed for risk management activities, and you can take a reference of these documents if you want to get more information. And that's how you derive the technical documentation. Okay, and ultimately, this is the pathway. We have seen two or couple of pathways for different markets. This is the pathway for European market, wherein it starts with determining the risk classification of the device. And before this also, point zero will be identifying if your product qualify as a medical device or not. Only when you are sure that your device, your product is medical device, then you go ahead and determine the risk classification of the device. Then similar to that, you establish the QMS as per EN ISO 13485. You comply with GSPR. This GSPR is nothing but the requirement given in EU MDR, the text as that I mentioned, right? It is around 200 pages text that you have to go through for EU MDR. And in that text, there is a section, Annex 1, which is called as General Safety and Performance Requirements. There are around 23 requirements divided for different aspects of medical device life cycle. And these 23 are also again divided into sub-clauses. So you should make a list, Excel sheet or a format wherein you enlist all those requirements. You state its applicability for your device. You provide the reference standard and provide the evidence documents. So that is how you generate the GSPR, and that data, that document should be drafted. Then there is compilation of clinical data as per the guidance document that I mentioned. There should be clinical evaluation plan, clinical evaluation report, literature search report, literature search plan. All those documents should be in place. Then complete technical documentation, the state documentation that I mentioned, a summarized format with different section. Then you also, while doing this, you also figure out your supply chain. Who should be your distributor? How your supply chain will look like, right? Who should be your authorized representative, notified bodies? All those things should be taken care while doing all these activities. Once you do that, your authorized representative will help you register your establishment in this Udemy database. It is a very mandatory and basic requirement that your entity should be enlisted, registered in the Udemy database. Along with that, whatever device you want to sell, CE mark device you want to sell in the European market, it should be listed in the Udemy database. And that helps the European population. They can also access directly this database. They can search with your device name and see how safe your devices, how good your devices, if there are any adverse events and recalls. So the utility of this Udemy database is it provides access to user about all the history of your device. That way they can choose better while getting the medical device treatment. And by that point, it also highlights that these other markets like US market or European market, they emphasize more on patient safety and data. That is why they have more requirements with respect to your performance and risk management or clinical data. So if you keep that in mind, getting into these markets will also becomes easier because you think from their perspective, generate sufficient data which is very appropriate for your device, and then you collect that data as per the guidance given. So it becomes easier for you to comply with this regulation. And then you get conformity assessment done from the notified bodies. And once you do that, they see that all the documentation, all the information is in place. They provide you declaration of conformity. This declaration of conformity is published on the databases and can be accessible by anybody. And also it provides you right to affix the same marking on your device. And once you have that, you are able to sell your device in European market. Okay. With that, we come to the conclusion of this session. As I have emphasized enough in the earlier sessions, what I have seen in my career of 10 plus years, there should be a robust premise from the manufacturer's perspective. There should be a reliable manufacturing process. Reliable by that means it should all the processes, all the equipment, all the machinery, and people involved should be competent enough. Equipment, machines, they should be validated, calibrated, and you should have people who are trained to operate those machines, to carry out those operations. So that is how you create a reliable manufacturing process. You should have post-market surveillance activities laid out in a proper format. How you are going to collect the sales data, the feedback, the surveys, and if there are any adverse events, how you are going to report those to the regulatory authorities. All the mechanisms should be in place for your post-market surveillance. Then, as I mentioned, there should be sufficient clinical and non-clinical data to prove the safety and effectiveness of your device. And finally, even after doing all these things, it is not enough until and unless you paint a good picture, right? The documentation is the first interface between you and the assessors or certifying body. So make that documentation as beautiful as you can. That way they will also appreciate, and you will also appreciate that you get the approvals quickly. And with that, I think I conclude here. Thank you so much for providing me this opportunity, and thank you for your patience you have shown for this session.
Thanks, Akash. I think we have so many questions that are rolling in. So I'll just fast forward to those questions first. Okay.
Yes.
So Nisha is asking, what are the CDSCO requirements for applications used along with the hardware? Example, patient registration and data management application.
Yes, for application used along with the hardware. I didn't get the
Yeah.
question, but
So,
yes, can you
suppose there's a
elaborate?
medical device, and to operate that medical device, one needs a software. So, do they need to take a separate CDSCO approval for that? If yes, what are the requirements for it? I'm trying to
Yes.
change this question, I think.
So you should submit the data with respect to software also when submitting the application for the device. The device,
Okay.
if it doesn't work apart from that software, and if it is a also component of complete system, then it is a requirement
Hmm.
that you should submit all the data with respect to hardware, software, electronic
Okay.
component for application. That way, it becomes easier for them to understand the functioning as a system.
Okay.
They can assess completely.
Okay. So,
Examples,
what
patient
if the
registration and data management application. Okay, for patient registration or data management application, if you are using software, the user interface, then yes, you should provide the details about what interface is there, what software has been utilized, software documentation such as software testing plan, software test reports, right? So you should submit this data to CDSL. Yes.
okay. Ramesh Naidu is asking, can you please elaborate on EU IVDR 2017-746 for Class A? What are the documents which one needs to prepare, and is there a software application that can, assist in functions of the hardware?
So class A is the least risky device. It is the IVD, the diagnostic kit, right? So for that purpose, you need to identify the quality management system first of all. Okay, it is self-certified device. It can be self-certified. So I'm not sure if it is having software, what kind of software they are utilizing, but make sure that your
Hmm.
software document is as per IC 62304. Okay, so this is the
Okay.
standard which takes care of software development lifecycle. So that is one aspect. And then the specificity, then the accuracy, all those factors should be taken care when you comply with this regulation. And what strategy we can apply to cautious steps and things to avoid. You should avoid misclassification. So if your device is having software and any other component which can be classified as class B or class 2A or class 2B, you should not classify it as class 1. That way, the efforts will be doubled because notified bodies will not accept your claim. So, cautious steps can be you can consult with someone who understands your product better and identify the requirements specific to that product category.
Okay. So Prashant is asking, is it acceptable to adopt ISO 13485 style documentation controls for non-medical products?
Um, I cannot really comment on non-medical products, but what I can tell you is ISO 13485 is infrastructure so that the quality and safety of any medical device is ensured. If you follow that approach for any other product category, you will get the same outcome. The quality and
Okay.
safety will be ensured. So I'm not suggesting that you should apply ISO 13485 for other product. I'm just saying that there is analogy because ISO 13485 is also derived from ISO 9001, which can be applied for any other products.
I see. So Ayushi is asking which authority or organization someone should approach to obtain CE marking for medical devices in Europe.
There are notified bodies, as I mentioned. These notified bodies are the ones who provide you CE marking. But even for getting that CE marking, you should also have authorized representative in Europe. Then you should have distributors in place. Until and unless you have these things figured out, you cannot really go into US market, European market. But it is good to establish first contact with these notified bodies and understand what all other requirements are. So notified bodies is the answer.
Okay. So Pez Ali is asking if a startup is not developing a new medical device from scratch, but they are working on a software side improvement like automated report generation, analytics, or workflow optimization, do they still require full medical device certification?
I think yes, because there will be the different legal manufacturer for that device. Even if
Okay.
it is just addition to feature. I mean, there can be two cases. One case where they are doing uh, innovation on the existing product with the same legal manufacturer. For
Hmm.
example, manufacturer ABC has developed certain medical device, and there are certain addition to the feature for that medical device. Then there is no requirement for additional certification or CE marking, but medical device A is already there in market with respect to manufacturer ABC, and manufacturer XYZ want to innovate on the product A, but that product will be considered as product B. Okay, and
Okay.
that is why
Okay.
they should get new certification, new CE mark because legal manufacturer changes and there will not be identical product. As in, all the functions will not be similar. There can be certain changes. So
Hmm.
notified bodies or the regulatory authorities are more concerned about these changes and also the design. So that is why
Okay.
they should go separately.
Okay. So again, Ayushi is asking how to register in Udamed database. Is there any specific process or documentation which is required?
Yes. So for UDA, registering to UDA-based, you should have UDI for your device, unique device identifier. That will be one of the parameters you should include in the UDA. Apart from that, you yourself cannot do that as a manufacturer outside India, outside Europe. You should
Hmm.
have European authorized representative who help you register your entity in UDA. So you should have authorized representative that can enter your details in that UDA.
Okay. So, Dr. Nitika is asking if we change the manufacturer based on production volume, would we be required to undergo the full regulatory approval process again? So, they are outsourcing their manufacturing. That's my understanding. So, now, if based on the production volume, if they change the manufacturer, would they still need to undergo a full regulatory approval process again?
I think no, they should not go through a complete regulatory approval. What they need
Hmm.
to do is they have to notify that to the regulatory authorities, the concerned regulatory authorities, whether it is CDSC or FDA or Europe. I'm
Hmm.
not talking about US FDA or C. I'm talking about CDSC only. They should notify this change to the CDSCO. CDSCO may ask questions regarding this change, and if they
Okay.
see appropriate, they may also ask you to complete the audit process and go ahead with a complete certification if it is large scale change with respect to specification or such.
Okay. Again, from Nitika, she's asking, is a CE certification obtained for the European market also considered valid for market access in UK?
Now there is, I mean, UK has distanced themselves from the European Commission, the European Union itself. So there is a separate regulatory body and regulations for UK. UK was, I think it is MHRA, which governs the medical devices in UK. And there is UKCA, UKCA conformity assessment procedure if you want to get access to UK market. But requirements remain similar if it is a regular legacy devices which was sold already, then there are certain provision to sell. But for new devices, you should go for UKCA if you want to enter in UK.
Okay, so that is it for the questions, Akash. But there are a lot of thank you that are rolling in for you, and many people are requesting for your slides and session highlights. So, as I said, this session is being recorded, so this would be available to you. That it will be uploaded on a public platform, and you may follow BIRAC LinkedIn handles and Venture Center LinkedIn handles. So these would become accessible. I
For
Yeah,
slides, just saying that I need to check with our management
yeah,
and
okay.
we'll share this slides also.
Okay, okay, great. Thanks a lot, Akash. I think the session was very insightful. It was so much fun to learn from you. Many new things which I also got to learn. So thanks a lot.
I hope it
Uh,
was not boring and nobody slept over.
it doesn't look like because the chat section is very vibrant. Everybody is very like they're rolling in so many thank yous.
Sure, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you again
Akash.
for inviting me. Look forward to have collaboration going forward. Thank you again. Thank you all.
For sure.
Have a good day.
So for the attendees, like now that all our speakers have like they spoke their piece, I'm very excited to hear your innovation journeys. So if you are coming to IIT Gandhinagar, please catch me, and I would be like honored to hear your story. So let's catch up. Thank you. Thank you. We may close the meeting. Thanks, Akash, again.
Thank you so much. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye bye.